fáilte léir, fáilte Barbara, tá an áthasarm, bheithe caint leat aniu. So it's my real pleasure to finally meet Barbara in person. We've been virtual friends, and I think when she wrote this book, she was writing my life. And our lives have we discovered, run in parallels. We are roughly the same age. We live in the roughly the same location, and we have a few common friends. So it's really a delight to get to chat to you and to dig a little bit deeper into the stories that you regale us with in your book, Wise Up. Barbara has at various different times worked in travel, PR, computer training. I want to talk more about that one when we come to, not about the computer side, the women that were there. Yeah, and then into a very successful portfolio career, broadcasting, writing columns, opinion pieces, and now this, Wise Up, Power, Wisdom and the Older Woman, has just been published by Zaza Publishing. And for those of you who haven't read it yet, it's part memoir, part self-help guide, part rant, about various things that are important in our lives at the moment. I've noticed that I was going to say there are only women in the room, but that's not true. And that's great to see. And actually, I wasn't going to start with that point, but I'm going to start with that point now. I'm going to ask you, who's the book aimed at?
Well, it's an interesting point, because obviously when I was writing it, I was aiming it at women. But since it was published, when I started doing a lot of the press and publicity around it, particularly the radio, every single radio studio that I walked into, mainly local radio, I was greeted by a male presenter, which says something about radio, but park in that. And it was only when I walked in that I kind of went, oh, it's a man. You know, I hope they get it. I hope they don't kill me, because I take a bit of a pot shot, not at men, but at the patriarchy. But the men that have interviewed me, who are mainly the ones that I've spoken to about the book in any kind of detail, all got it, which, you know, cheered me enormously. I'm one of the biggest fans of the book, and one of the first interviews I did was with Pat Kenny. And Pat Kenny, you know, I mean, I meet Pat Kenny in News Talk obviously on a regular basis, but this was not because he's not like that. He's a forensic interviewer. He absolutely loved the book, and he wouldn't tell you that if he didn't. So I think it's a book that perhaps men will enjoy as well, and can identify obviously with some of it, as most of us share our lives with men, and I think they get a kind of a ringside seat to a lot of the issues that I discuss in the book. Yeah,
and I think we'll come back to it, but I also think it's a book that all women of all ages should read.
Yeah.
Because I thought nothing about menopause when I was much younger, and I never thought about life after menopause when I was much younger, and I think it's really important, and you make the point about dreaming big and planting the seeds for those dreams to come to fruition at this stage of our lives. So I think it's a book that should be read by everybody, really, and it's both entertaining and informative, and written with your trademark humour and and passion.
Thank you.
So let me ask you first of all about the way the book is organised, how you laid it out, and the rationale behind that.
The rationale, I wish I could tell you there was a rationale behind it. This book was mainly written during COVID, during the lockdowns, when obviously our lives all shrank, and a lot of people's work, including my own, kind of shrank a lot, and my husband's disappeared altogether. We were all thrown together, and as Justine said, I've been writing for about the last 10 or 12 years, mainly doing newspaper columns, that kind of stuff, on a freelance basis. And I thought, sure, now's the time. I'd always wanted to write a book. And I thought, well, if you're going to write a book, you know, kind of now is the time, you probably need to write the book. And I thought, yeah, that'd be a lovely thing to do now during lockdown. Sit down, write my book, or as my middle daughter calls it, write down all your little thoughts, Ma. And so I thought, write down all my little thoughts, and I'll excavate some of the things that I've written about. There was certain themes, the stuff that I'd been writing for the last 10 years, mainly around women and feminism and all that kind of equality and that. And I thought, and I'd put in a few of my own stories, and I actually didn't think it through. So literally I lashed the whole lot and I kept going, and I was just fixated on, because I have the attention span of a goldfish, and I thought I have to get to 75,000 words and then that's a book. And that seemed to be this huge mountain. It was like running a marathon. So I thought, keep going, get to the 7. And when I got to the 75,000 words, I gave it a bit of an edit. And then I thought, I've written a book, that's great, and made all the mistakes. In other words, sent it off to all the publishers, not realizing that what I was sending them was like giving somebody a half-baked cake or not particularly well-cooked dinner. It was a first draft. So, and all the publishers came back and said, oh, thank you, Barbara, we look forward to reading this. And then, tumbleweed. Nothing. So I realized there was something seriously wrong with the book. So long story short, there was various people who kind of offered me some kind of insights. Nobody kind of said, this is what you have to do, but gave me a general picture of, how a book needs to be. So I started to edit it, and it took me as long to edit it as it did to write it. And it was in the final stages, I'd done about 3 edits, and I knew the book still wasn't right, that I had to actually put it away for about 3 months and not touch it, and then come back to it. And then it was glaringly obvious that it was not organized in the right manner. So then I decided to break it down into 2 distinct sections. So the first section of the book is basically the kind of more the memoir part, although there is a lot of anecdote, there is a lot of kind of ranty bits in there as well as a result of the anecdotes. So I broke the book down into the first part of the book is looking back on the adult decades of my life, and perhaps taking some of the things that were kind of, I suppose, formative in each of those decades. So I look at my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, my 50s, and then as I was writing the book, I was hurtling towards my 60th birthday. So then I kind of look forward into what I think is going to happen in my 60s. So that came around. I'd love to say, oh yeah, I had that idea in my head. I didn't. It was literally in desperation that at the last minute I thought that's what needs to be done. And then the second part is about planning for your 60s, dreaming about what you want to do, and your 70s, not just your 60s, but life beyond, your third age, as I now know it's called, and talking about your health and looking after your health, which was taken from my own experience, and then kind of bringing the whole, and finding your voice and all that kind of stuff. So it's 2 distinct sections, and I suppose the first part has a little bit of the self-helpy thing, although, I'm not qualified to give anybody self-help about anything, but at the end of each of those sections on the decades, I have a couple of prompts, because what I discovered afterwards, which I didn't know at the time, was that what I'd done was called a life audit, and apparently it's something that is a very good idea to do, because I think all of us need to look back, especially women, need to look back on the decades of our lives, because I don't think we give ourselves credit very often for the things that we've done and the things that we've survived. And I think it's only when you look back, and you don't have to go into huge detail, but just look back at the big things that happened in each decade. You come away learning two or three really important things. Number one is that you're stronger than you ever thought you were. And I mean, my life, as you said, mirrored yours. My life isn't extraordinary. I didn't, do anything extraordinary. I poddled along like most of us do. But what you realize when you look back is that you're stronger than you thought. You're smarter probably than you give yourself credit for. And also you're wiser than you thought. And that wisdom, which is, I suppose, one of the main premises of the book, comes from lived experience. You can't get wise from going to university. I know loads of people who went to university, not wise. You can't get it from a book, even when it has wise up on the title. Your wisdom comes from your own life experience. But I think as women, our life experience isn't valued very often, because a lot of what we do is not valued and is invisible. So that's a very long-winded answer to a question that you asked me about 20 minutes ago.
But I do like the fact that, first of all, there's the anecdotes, and they resonated with me, and they're light and easy to read, but also you see moments of your own life in there. And then when you put the questions at the end of the chapter, I think that's a really good idea, because I sat and I thought, where was I in my 20s?
Yeah.
What did I get out of my 30s? What did I think then, and what do I think now about that time? So it was really good to have the entertainment, the information, and then the thought-provoking questions. So that really worked for me while reading the book, and yeah, kind of prompted me to do a little bit of a life audit. A life audit as well. So the first decade you deal with is the 20s, and in fact, in a lot of the decades, there's kind of two halves.
Yeah.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about how your 20s
Well, my 20s
went?
started off probably as most of us started our 20s. You know, world is your oyster. You've left school. You're suddenly an adult. You know, your man, your dad aren't in charge. You're in charge. Yay. You know, you're legally able to do all the things that you've kind of thought about or maybe experimented with when you were younger, but now it's all legal and it's all official and all these heady delights that you're going to experience, and you can be whoever you want to be and you can have it all and all that stuff. And that was all great. And I joined the travel business and fell in love and it was all great. It was all going along swimmingly well. And then when I was 24, I went on holidays and came back with more than a souvenir and discovered I was pregnant. And this was in 1986 and my baby was born in 1987. So, you know, bringing you back to that time, this was the same year that Anne Lovett died in Longford. The Kerry babies were still. So, although I come from, you know, a middle-class suburban background, and my parents were supportive, I did break my father's heart, and I talk about that in the book. And I was aware of that, you know. I amused my brothers. I have no sisters, and I'm the eldest, and I had 3 brothers who all thought it was highly hilarious that their big sister, who was always like the one who did everything right and went to school and studied and didn't mess around, and now she was pregnant. And they were all like, let's see how this plays out. As I say, my father found it really difficult to cope with, and I remember when I told him, and again, I think I don't know, maybe it was the hormones or whatever. I knew he wouldn't be like having a party, but I kind of was stupid in thinking. My father was a retired at that time civil servant, very conservative man, steady as a rock, great dad, but like didn't think we should, you know, was a pioneer, didn't like drink, was very conservative, quiet man, and I broke his heart. And I remember going in and telling him, and had he been angry with me, I think I would have found that easier to bear. But he just got up and I heard him go upstairs and he vomited for about 20 minutes in the bathroom. And I remember thinking, he just didn't know how to handle it. And he didn't speak to me for about a month. And I was living at home and there was no anger. He was numb. I could, you know, and he was shocked to his core. And I remember then, I was at the point of saying to my mother, I'm going to have to move out. Like, we can't, you know, I mean, there's an atmosphere in the house. He's upset. I'm the cause of it. I'll have to move out. Even though I didn't earn enough to be able to afford to move out. But anyway, my father came around one day. I was on the way into work. It was snowing. And I walked down for the train. And because of the snow, there was no train. So I arrived back in the house at about 10 o'clock in the morning. And he was in the kitchen, and I walked in the door, and I even though he wasn't speaking to me, I kept speaking to him, and I kind of said, there was no train. And he turned around, and which my father wasn't, as men of his generation, wasn't an affectionate, you know, man. And he turned around and he pulled me into a hug, and he said, we'll stand by you, it'll be all right. And that was all he ever said. He never discussed it further. For the rest of the pregnancy, I got bigger. My mother was knitting matinee coats. My father was in complete denial about anything ever, where this was going to end up. But the other story which I tell in the book, which again gives you an insight into that particular time in Ireland, was that he was, as I say, retired. I was on maternity leave. My daughter had been born, and the phone rang one day. This is before mobile phones. So there's one phone in the hall. I answered the phone. And it was a friend of my father's who was also in the public service, quite senior, had a degree of public profile, an important man. And I answered the phone to him, and he asked to speak to my father, and I said, fine, I got my dad. And I could only hear my dad's side of the conversation, obviously, which went like, yeah, no, that was Barbara. No, she is working. Yeah, no, she's on maternity leave. No, she didn't get married, no. And then he said, you know, she does know who the father is. Because back then, the idea that you get pregnant and you weren't married means obviously you were giving it out all over everywhere and you were a slut. So that gives you the kind of the idea of where we were. So it was a formative experience.
A formative experience, absolutely. But again, you drew, as you said yourself, you drew strength. You had more strength than you realised at the time.
Yeah, I didn't. It was only looking back that those kind of things I realised. And the other thing which I realised, which again, when we were debating marriage equality in this country, I was reminded of it, was that I spent the next probably 10 years, up until my daughter, maybe more, maybe 15 years, but certainly the years when I was at home and my daughter was small, sitting in front of the Late Late Show on Saturday night. And it's the Late Late Show that stands out in my mind for all the good it did in the country. And there seemed to be every second programme, because we'd brought in the Unmarried Mothers Allowance a few years before, as it was nicely called, and single parents were starting to get some kind of financial supports from the state. And there seemed to be debate after debate after debate about how this was going to corrupt the entire country, that these young women were all going to get pregnant so they could get a house, and then that their children would all be delinquent children because they had no father figures in their life. So how could they not be? They will definitely be delinquent. And I didn't realise how much that affected me until my daughter's 21st birthday. 21 years later, I'm Mrs. Respectable. I'm married, have 2 more kids, got a husband. My daughter, who was the firstborn, the one who I was the single parent with, it was her 21st. And I remember standing at this very ordinary 21st party like all her mates had had, and looking at her and thinking, she's fine.
She's not delinquent.
She's no worse or better than anybody else's kid. She's fine. And then I got really angry at why I had expected. And I realised I hadn't been a particularly good mother, I don't think, when she was a teenager, because I kept waiting for her to go off the rails. So when she did all the kind of stuff that teenagers do in order to push the boundaries, I tended to overreact. So yeah, that made me angry then as well.
And how was it for you writing those years?
Yeah,
revisiting and writing them?
It wasn't, I mean, you know, it was, I suppose I was giving myself credit, because my mother always said that it made me, and I think I was born pretty bolshy, but I think she always said that having Carla made me like twice more bolshy than I used to be. And I used to apply for jobs back then, and on my CV, I practically put unmarried mother across the top of it. And then wonder why nobody wanted to employ me. And I remember her gently saying, maybe take that off the CV. I don't think it's helping. So I think it always, like, that was the way I kind of handled it, was like, yeah, I'm a single parent, like, so what? What are you going to do about it? But it was only when I kind of, with the benefit of all the decades, look back, I realised, yeah, I was only 24, which now back then was older than it is now. I have a 24-year-old daughter now who's only just finished college and getting her first job. But I was only 24, and I was very lucky, and what I have now is huge respect for anybody parenting alone, be they male or female, because it isn't easy, and I had the support of a family. How the young women who didn't have that did it is beyond me, don't know.
Yeah, and it's a lonely path.
Lonely.
Because it puts a halt to your gallop.
Yeah, it certainly puts a halt to your gallop. Yeah, and you find yourself outside the circle of respectability, and people don't really know what to do with you. You're not married and you're not single because you have a child, so you don't have the freedom of being single, but you don't have the companionship or the stuff of being in a relationship either. So yeah, it kind of puts you into a strange place.
I found very very interesting when you spoke about the various jobs that you had, but particularly when you started in the computer teaching.
Yeah.
Not from the point of view of the actual job.
Oh, good.
But the women who came. Yeah. Would you tell us a little bit
that was
about
my mother. My mother was an incredible woman. She only died in January, and she was an amazing woman. But anyway, when I had Carla, I was working in the travel business, and I realised, I went back to work in the travel business, but realised fairly early on I was commuting into town, the hours were long, the pay was really bad, I was paying for childcare, it wasn't great. So she had just left her job and had set up a small business working from home, teaching word processing. 1987, word processing was just, taken off, and she saw a gap in the market, and so she started teaching on an individual one-to-one basis word processing from our sitting room. So she said to me, why don't you leave the travel and come and work with me and go and do a teacher's diploma and come and work with me? Now, I would have honestly preferred to stick pins in my eyes than be working with my mother teaching computer applications, but I had to be practical, and it worked. I was working from home, I wouldn't need as much childcare, yada, yada, yada. So anyway, I did it, and I wasn't a particularly great teacher. I lived in fear and dread because I was only one page ahead of everybody else on the manual. But anyway, so we started this teaching in the front room of our house. And I mean, it's only now when I'm thinking of it, there's so many other things that I didn't put in the book that I should have put in the book about that time that I started to remember now that I'm talking about it. Like the day that my daughter decided to see, our front room was in the front of the house downstairs. And my said daughter was about, I don't know, 5 or 6. She was upstairs and she decided to see if it was true that cats always land on their feet. So she decided to drop the cat out the bedroom window. And we're teaching computers and this cat sails by the window. Anyway, and there was various other things as well. My mother's brother lived with us who has a learning disability, and that was great crack because he would talk to anybody. We used to say to him, don't talk to any of the women you see coming in. They're coming for, just... So his idea of not talking to people was if he was happened to be in the hall when one of them was coming or going, he just put his hands over his eyes and walked up and down the hall. Anyway, but the women that we had were mainly referred to us from the secretarial agencies and recruitment agencies in the area. And we discovered very early on that a huge high percentage of them were women who were going back to work, who had left work when they got married and had children and were at home looking after their families. And 9 times out of 10, the reason for going back to work was because their husbands had walked out. And they were suddenly deserted on their own, and they had to earn money, and they had to go back. And the offices that they left were using golf ball typewriters, and now suddenly they have these computers and word processors. They were terrified, they had no confidence, they were hurt, and they were just incredible. Like, I mean, my mother and I used to laugh about it because we used to have to buy big boxes of tissues because the first class that any of these new students had, very often, you were trying to find out did they have any experience of computers. So you were asking them about their working life, and then their whole story would come cascading out. So we were kind of therapists in the room, having to listen to a lot of this stuff and allow them to cry and try and build them back up and give them a little bit of confidence. But it was about a year afterwards that I just was like, these women are incredible. They're warriors. They were so brave, and what they were doing was so hard. And they were also trying to do all of this without dissing the husbands, who very often had met somebody younger and was gone off. But they were trying to keep the relationship between the children and the husband, so they were keeping all this stuff inside themselves. And it was one of the first times that I really was hit smack in the face with, like, women are amazing, and they really did. They really taught me so much about their resilience. It was really powerful.
So, you think obviously your experience with women has been very very positive. And you had a name for being a bit of a man hater for a while.
Yeah.
And that must have hampered you in the dating field when that came about.
Well, look, I was already hampered. I was I'm still am, 6 foot tall. Like, back in the day, that was a big I couldn't go to a disco and sit down, because as soon as I sat down, smallest guy in the place would come and ask me to dance. And you were faced with, you could see him steaming towards you, like the Titanic going towards an iceberg. And you'd be kind of going, will I tell him, like, back off, buddy, like, this isn't going to work? Will I stand up, in which case he's suddenly going to go, oh, Jesus. Or will I just say no and let him try and work it out? You were in a no-win situation.
I had the opposite.
Okay, yeah. So I was already hampered, there wasn't, so yeah, I mean, my experience of being a single parent probably was the main thing, plus the fact that I grew up with 3 brothers, whom, I get on well with now, and they're grand. Now they've grown up. But didn't, all of that kind of, I think, did make me into a bit of a man hater. My mother stood up at my wedding finally. I mean, the day I got married was, well, it was the second happiest day in my father's life where it came to me. He couldn't believe I'd met a man who was willing to take me on, and the daughter as well. And he just thought this was incredible altogether. But I do remember my mother wrote a poem which she stood up and read at my wedding, which included a line about the Chinese I ate so many Chinese takeaways that she was sure that the Chinese would have to be reassured that I wasn't moving now that I was married, because they might go bust. But also the fact that, oh, this is you who always said you didn't need a man. I don't need a man in my life, and now you're going to be the wife. And I don't know, it was great. It was a great poem. But I was a bit of a man hater, and kudos to my husband, who, I'd like to say it was because he's very emotionally intelligent and he has a great depth to him, but I don't think that's the case. I think he was just, he's one of these, he was just stupid, and he just thought, she's fine, I'll wear her down, and he
Because
did.
it was a case of wearing you down, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, but he persevered.
He persevered.
And I don't hate men.
No, and that comes through as well.
Yeah, no, I do quite like men.
Yeah. For me, one of the most important things in this book is that you progress through the different stages, and you come to talk about menopause, and that's where the narrative usually stops.
Yeah.
Talking about menopause at all used to be quite taboo. Now it's more out in the open, and there's a lot more programs on the TV and radio, more books about it. But that's where it stops. There's nothing about after, post-menopause, and what's to be, and what could be, and what's coming next. And that's why I found this book so inspiring. It gave rise to these thoughts of possibilities, and it made visible the years that come after the menopause.
Well, that was one of the reasons that I was very keen to write the book, because again, like you say, I'm very pleased that we're now talking about menopause. Because, when I was growing up, menopause was known as the change, and it was all shrouded in secrecy, and nobody really talked about it. Women's stuff was women's stuff, and you just you didn't discuss it in polite society. It certainly wasn't part of any kind of national conversation. And so I really am delighted that we're now talking about menopause. I'm not so delighted that, all of the various industries have, you can now buy menopause shampoo and menopause soap and menopause trousers and menopause, which is all a whole load of absolute bullshit. But I'm glad we're talking about menopause. But I worry about two things in relation to the conversation. Number one is that a lot of, and I get this is very often when we try and rebalance something that was out of whack. In other words, we didn't talk about it at all, we're now trying to balance it, and we're gone a little bit too far, I think, in the other direction. And I think an awful lot of the talk about menopause is deeply, darkly depressing, and it talks about, all the problems, which is good, but it's not a balanced conversation. And I'm not an expert on menopause, but what I do know is that every woman's experience of menopause is different, and it's not all hugely problematic. Many women get through it, challenging, but get through it. But the most important point is that it is only a transition. It's only a portal. It's a gateway. So no matter what your experience of menopause is, you're not stuck there forever. And this is what I found myself shouting, going, yeah, but you get beyond it. You don't need it forever. It's a transit lounge, and then your flight will eventually take off and you'll be gone. And for me, it was that realization that once I came out of the kind of, I visualize it very often as a river, where you're in a canoe or whatever, and you're going, I don't know what it's like to be in a canoe on a river, in fairness, but what I imagine it would be like, and you're going through the rapids, and it's all a bit bouncy, and it's a bit terrifying, and you feel a bit out of control. And then all of a sudden, everything calms, and you're in this lovely, calm place. And I just thought, why is nobody talking about this? Why is nobody saying that once you get through menopause, it's feckin' deadly? And that was one of the things, as I was writing the book, I was coming up to my 60th birthday, and I suddenly realized menopause was receding into the background. And I suddenly thought, hang on a minute, I now have freedoms that I haven't had for years. And the biggest freedom is freedom for a woman is freedom from your biology. From the time we are 12 or 13, we are dealing with our female biology. And I don't want to diss our female biology because it's what allows us to procreate and have children and blah, blah, blah. But, from the time you're a girl in school, and being in here has given me all kinds of serious flashbacks. Of being in school and the uniform and the PE days and your period and, managing all of that. And then you leave school and, you still have, going to work and pretending, yeah, you're great, and you're actually out of your head on Nurofen because, you've got awful cramps, and letting on that you feel great when you don't feel great. And then you have the years of contraception and trying not to get pregnant, which some of us didn't totally master. But, so you have all that. And then if you're in a relationship or whatever, and you decide you have all the years of trying to get pregnant, which, can be difficult as well. And then all that goes, and then you've got menopause. And then it's over. And it's like, wow. And I really feel that there's a huge connection between the women we become I'm using 60 as just a thing. When you become 60, there's a huge connection between the woman you are then and the woman and the girl you were and the dreams you had as a young girl. And I quote, I think, Gloria Steinem in the book, where she describes this and says, you know, I'm still the girl I was who, you know, used to climb trees and used to know what I thought. And then life kind of descends and you get all the stuff of life. But she said, now I'm in this place where I still have those dreams and I still know what I want, but now I can reach the light switch. I own my own apartment and I have a few bob in the bank. And that makes us hugely powerful. So along with the freedom from your biology, or the other 4 freedoms, the other freedom then is the freedom, well, this is a great one. And I mean, you know, you'll all know this. And this started for me when I turned 40, is the freedom from the weight of other people's opinions. When I turned 40, I remember starting to go, I don't actually care as much what people think. And again, as women, we learn from the time we're girls that we will be judged on how we look all the time, all the time. You know, we learn very early that no matter what you achieve, if you manage to look hot or cute or whatever it is society thinks you should look, in doing it, it'll be worth more. And suddenly, as you get older, and I started noticing at 40, but by 60, I don't care. You can keep all your opinions about me, about how I look, about how I dress, about my weight, about my hair, about whatever. You can keep them all to yourself. I actually don't care, and that's brilliant. I was going to have financial freedom, but that's a bit iffy at the minute, so we'll leave that one out. The other one then is the fear of the freedom from your kids. I mean, if you're a parent and you suddenly get to this age where your kids are adults, now they may not be fledged, they may be still somewhat dependent on you financially, they don't need you to make their dinner every day. They don't need you looking at them 24/7. And I remember when my youngest left school, I sat the 2 who were still at home down and I said, now, you're all finished at your school, you're in college, that's your business. You know, I hope you make a success with your business. And if I'm in and I'm cooking dinner, of course you'll be included. But I might not be in because I might have stuff to do and I might have something on. And then there's a freezer there and sort yourselves out. So there's that. And then there's also the freedom from the fear of failure. Because again, if you do a life audit and you look back on your decades of your life, you'll realize that you've made loads of mistakes and you've probably failed, possibly spectacularly, and you're still here and you're grand. So failure doesn't hold the kind of fear that it does when you're younger. And that makes you more radical and more willing to take chances on things and more adventurous. Yeah. So all of that packaged up means that, hitting 60 and hopefully 70 is absolutely deadly. And what happens when we reach that age? What are we told? We're invisible? Yeah. Bullshit. And that we should all be fighting anti-aging. Bullshit. Total and utter impossibility to fight aging. And there is a huge multi-billion-dollar industry built up around women's insecurities about how they look, which we have been trained to be totally kind of distracted about from the time we're young. So I genuinely believe that older women in particular, when you get to I'll stop now in a second. When you get to an age where you have nothing to lose, I don't care who I offend with my opinions anymore. Do you know, I don't have kids who are going to go to school and come home being bullied because, Jesus, man, like, you know what I mean? When you dial it down a bit, you're ranting. So I think that we are perfectly positioned as older women to start calling bullshit on all of the stuff that women put up with for decades. I think also you do get a bit mad when you start to look back and you go, Jesus Christ. And you get even madder when you realize so many things that haven't changed. Yeah. So I think that older women have a huge role to play in doing that, in calling stuff out and in making life better for our women, for our girls and our daughters and our granddaughters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much power in what you're saying and giving voice to that the next age, which has so much to offer. And as you said, all those things you mentioned are so liberating. Yeah. And that gives you time to come back to yourself. Absolutely. And to do what you want to do. I had, at one stage, I asked a son of mine to get something from a cupboard that was very high up. And he said, no, get it yourself. And I was like, that's a bit mean. Yeah. And he said, no, he said, use it or lose it. He said, get a chair, get up on the chair and get it. He said, because it might be the last time you ever do that. He said, but you just need to keep, as long as you can, you need to keep moving, doing, and And he said, obviously, if you can't, I'll get it for you. But just don't hand over that responsibility to other people. Keep moving your body. And that whole concept is very important to you as well, about being fit for this next stage.
Yeah, very
being
important.
ready and healthily ready for the next stage.
Yeah, and I mean, that was something that I learned, again, by accident, because I'm still overweight, but I was a lot more overweight. And I made an absolute virtue for decades of hating exercise. Absolute virtue of it. And that probably stems back, again, getting flashbacks in here, to school and the fact that I was tall. So I got press ganged into playing basketball. And then I got press ganged into trying out for the shot put and the long jump, and all of which I was rubbish at. But they made me stay on the basketball team the whole way through school, and I hated it. So, as soon as I left school, I'm not doing exercise anymore, and I didn't. And then, I'm all about, and I still am about, I'm a mother of 3 daughters, I'm still all about body positivity and not being judged or shamed about your body in any way, and I'm still all about that. But unfortunately, I had taken it kind of to the nth degree and was ignoring the fact that I was terribly unfit. I had a very sedentary lifestyle. I didn't do any exercise. I spent a decade at home with my kids, during which I learned to bake. I'm not brilliant, but I liked baking, and then I was my own baking's biggest fan. And I also ate too much because my mother says that's something to do with the famine. That we don't know how to do portion control. We always make a bit extra. Anyway, the net result of all of this was, and again, this is a warning to women I hate that term, women of a certain age. Anyway, women of a certain age. Is that in my mid-50s, I suddenly got very tired. And I kind of just went, here's menopause again. Like, this is another yoke now. I'm just really tired. But I was really tired, and then we came down to West Cork for a couple of weeks where I did nothing. And I came home just as tired, and I thought, no, this isn't right. There's something up. Anyway, long story short, diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, which is the diabetes you give yourself, which is really not clever. And I did feel kind of guilty about the fact that I had a healthy body, which I had allowed to go to pot, and now I have type 2 diabetes. But I also, once I got over that, I felt lucky, because I thought, this is something I can control myself. I knew diabetes was serious. If it's not looked after, it can affect all your organs. So it is serious, but it can be managed with diet and lifestyle. So all of a sudden, Barbara Scully, aged 50, whatever I was, 7.5, had to face up to the fact that she was a fat, lazy cow who needed to take herself in hand if she wanted to stay well. So I had to, and I write about this in the book, I had to overhaul my diet, as in my food intake. And again, one of the things I think is really important, and you'll know yourself if you have a diet that isn't particularly healthy, as I did, but I just wouldn't face it, is to find a way of changing that suits you, and don't blindly follow anybody else's diet and say, I'm going to do this diet or that diet or the other diet. You need to develop a lifestyle that works for you. And I talk about that in the book. And then the other thing which I obviously had to do was to move, because I never realized the relationship between carbohydrates and sugar. So if you eat too many carbs and you don't do anything, and I was a great woman for the pasta and the potatoes and the rice, and if you don't move, then the extra carbohydrate that you're not using up in energy gets turned into sugar, which I never knew. So I had to cut down on my carbohydrates, and then I had to move my lardy ass off the sofa. So I started doing what everybody probably would start doing, walking, because you don't need, had a pair of runners, I could walk. But being overweight, as soon as I started walking, my knees started to give out, my ankles started to give out, and I thought, well, God doesn't want me to walk. I can't walk. And then I happened to meet Dr. Niall Moyna, who's an expert in this area at North one day, and I was moaning to him and saying, I'm trying my best to sort myself out and I can't walk, because then he said, are you power walking? And I said, well, yeah, that's what you're made to walk fast. And he goes, stop power walking, just move, just walk. So when I slowed up, that helped. But I did all kinds of things. I joined a gym, which I vowed I would never do, and terrified me, absolutely. It was actually, I honestly thought this gym will be full of loud music, it'll be black, it'll be full of these really thin, very fit people. And it wasn't. It was full of other people like me, and nobody gave a toss what I was doing there. So that was fine for a while. But the biggest life changer was my daughter, first daughter, now lives in Australia, came home for Christmas in 2019, just before the pandemic, and she brought her mother a bike. Only my daughter would think of bringing a bike from Australia. But anyway, she bought me a bike, which was one of those lovely, it was mint green, sit up and beg, kind of nice, kind of elegant bike. And I looked at it and went, holy fuck, like a bike. What the fuck? I haven't cycled a bike since I was 10. So I was like, that's great, thanks so much. Going, oh God. So the bike sat, no, we didn't even sit in the shed. It did look very pretty. And I said to my husband, I'm not putting that in the shed with the spiders. So it lived in my office, believe it or not, where I looked at it every day and went, it's lovely. And she was called Sheila. And then the pandemic happened and we all couldn't go beyond 2 kilometres. And I thought, well, now's the time to try out the bike, much to the amusement of my neighbours, because I was rubbish for about the first couple of weeks. But the bike has been a life changer. Now Sheila has since passed on, and I've got a bike because Sheila had very few gears, which it took me a while to realise why going up a hill was quite so hard. So now I have a few more gears. But it's life changer. It's given me a freedom, and it makes me feel like I did when I was 12. And also you've the added kind of the high moral ground, because you're not taking the car out. But you go to the post office and I'm on the bike. You look at me, yay, saving the planet. So yeah, but I mean, it is important now that I move every day. And I mean, even this morning I got up and went out in the wind and the rain and walked for about 5K. Lovely. Because if I don't, diabetes, although it's in remission, it's still here just behind me. So, you know, if I take my eye off the ball, it'll come back and bite me in the ass. So yeah, it's really important. It's really important to mind your health, obviously, because you have this amazing time ahead. You need to be well enough to make the most of it.
So you are now a wise owl.
Well, yes, I am. We are all wise owls.
We are all wise owls.
We don't realise our wisdom.
Absolutely. And one of my favourite parts of the book is when you talk about the owl. And so maybe you'd like to read that section of that for us.
This is gas, actually, because normally if I'm doing a reading, I have a particular piece in it about magic knickers. There's a whole bit about magic knickers, which usually brings the house down. But this bit, I was out for my walk this morning and I passed the falconry place down at the end here, and I suddenly thought, oh, maybe I should read about the owl. So this is from the very end of the book, and the section is called The Wisdom of an Old Owl. Some years ago, himself gave me a gift of a hawk walk deep in the countryside in County Wicklow. It was a wonderful day, spelt learning about and being up close and personal with birds of prey and owls. When our session was over, the falconer led us out of the yard where all the birds were kept. On the way out, he stopped to introduce us to a huge owl sitting on a tree stump at the door of the cottage office. He handed me a glove and carefully manoeuvred this large bird onto my arm, explaining that this was a rescue owl who had not been properly looked after. It had been fed processed meat and was thus a bit of a couch potato. She could fly, but she generally didn't bother, her hunting instincts all gone through years of being a pet. The more the falconer explained about this bird, the more I realised that I had met a kindred spirit. This was a mature, overweight owl who had forgotten her own magnificence and inherent wisdom through no fault of her own. I stroked her feathers, which were soft and downy. She turned to look at me, and we connected. Me and this owl, both of us with miles on the clock, with years of experience, with all our sadness and our joy. We both wore all of this on the outside. However, on the inside, we both knew that she was still a majestic bird, a hunter and a thinker of deep thoughts. We gazed at each other and our thoughts fused in the space between us. Yes, she said, I am owl. I can see the unseen. I can read the moon. I have stories. I am a wise old owl. I often think of that wise old owl sitting on her tree stump, pondering all that life had taught her. In my mind, I see her fly at night into the inky darkness, silently and invisibly into the woods, where she communes with her owl sisters and brothers, sharing her wisdom, her stories, and her experiences. I'm going to get into trouble here now because there's a few Irish words here and I'm conscious of where I am. So in advance, apologies if I scramble these. The Irish word for owl is ulcabón, but colloquially, owls were often called cailleach ihe, which translates as old woman of the night, although cailleach obviously is also the word for witch. But best of all, a barn owl or screech owl is called scracho greliga, which is screecher of the cemetery. What better spirit animal for silver women, reminding us to screech our truth at the cemetery of the patriarchy. Turkish writer and thinker Murat İlden said, the inauspiciousness of the owl is nothing but the inauspiciousness of the man who thinks that the owl is inauspicious. And that is nothing compared to the inauspiciousness of men who think that postmenopausal women are inauspicious, invisible, harmlessly batty, or past our prime. We are, in fact, busy remembering who we truly are and what it is that we really want for ourselves, for our daughters and our granddaughters, and for the world. Like my owl friend, we are wising up to our true power and wisdom, and one day we may indeed form an army to take over the world.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah. That is so powerful, that image of the owl and the community and no longer being invisible.
It's something, and that quote it comes from earlier in that chapter. I quote again Gloria Steinem, who's one of my heroes, who said that men get more conservative with age, but women get more radical. And then she said, someday an army of grey-haired women may just take over the world. I think there's never been a more perfect time.
So, Barbara, what's next? You've
written
your first book?
Yeah, well, you see, I've got addicted now to talking to people. I've got addicted to coming to literary festivals. I like all of that, like the attention. So I'm going to have to do it again.
You'll have to do it
So,
again.
yeah, I'm working. I've kind of got a vague outline, but then every time I think about it, I change something. But yeah, I am going to get down to writing another book. The last few months have been really busy, and it's been great. And I've been doing a lot of traveling, which has been amazing and brilliant and marvelous. But I have said to myself now, come December. My husband is becoming a citizen in 2 weeks' time in Killarney. He's English. Well, he's not English anymore. He's now Irish. But after that, I'm going to get down to get back to writing. So hopefully there'll be another one. And if I might just say, if any of you are listening to the radio in the morning, before you come down to the Dingle Literary Festival, I will have a script on Sunday Miscellany tomorrow as well, which I've just heard. So that's on at 9 o'clock on RT1 after the news.
Yes, great. Now, there are a few minutes left, and I'm sure there are loads of questions. Would anybody like to ask Barbara anything about her book, about her life?
About your lives.
Your lives.
Can I ask from the point of view?
If you just wait for the microphone here. Sorry. There you go. It's come.
Just from the point of view of you writing your book and then, having a look over it and going and eventually getting the help you needed, which really shortened the route, and then you redid it. Is there anything you could tell to anyone here who is thinking of doing anything like that would shorten the route straight off, make it more economy of movement, a better, shorter
You're talking about writing a book?
Yeah, or writing something. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's the advice that I've listened to for ages as well, for years, when I, came to literary events and book festivals, which I've always been a big fan of. And all writers will say to you, the first thing is start writing. Yeah. Start putting words on a page, because you can read all the books you want, you can go to all the workshops you want, you can, do all of that stuff, you can ask for advice. But until you start actually putting words on a page, you have nothing to work with. So the first stage is putting words on a page. And I suppose, and again, my experience has been writing, much like I think, excuse me, a lot of artistic endeavors, the more you do it, the better you get at it, But even, and I've been writing now for 10 years, but even if I've had a couple of weeks like I've had in the last few weeks where I have written very, very little, it'll take me a while to get back into it when I start writing again. So it's about making it, if you're serious, a daily practice if you can. Keep writing. If you're writing a book, don't be an idiot like I was and think that once you get to the word count and you've kind of given it a bit of a schmucked, that it's grand. It's not. What you produce, and it's the same, I suppose, even, I don't know if you'd agree, for a shorter piece, if you're doing an article, your first draft is it's like a sculpture. What you've made is the piece of stone. You then have to chisel it into a form. And that actually is where I think the real skill very often comes in, is in being able to do that. And then give it to people to read. The first time you write, and Niamh said this at the thing we wrote earlier, the first book that you write is very personal. It's very much, well, no matter what you're writing, even if it's fiction, you put a large part of yourself in there. So you can be reluctant to share it, particularly with people you know. Do you know what I mean? Because you can kind of go, they're all, this is me now totally contradicting what I said earlier, but I don't care what anybody thinks. But, if you're giving it to a friend or whatever, it can be quite brave to do that. I mean, the easy thing is to give it to your mammy, and she'll go, it's lovely, I really liked it. But if you give it to a friend who you think will be honest, or better still, a couple of friends, that's very valuable as well. And listen to the feedback and don't take it personally. Ask people to be honest with you. But it's to start that process. You know, the sooner you start, the sooner you'll start moving forward. And then, as I say, you will start to realize yourself as you work on it, what's working and what's not working. But best of luck. See you next year. All right, great. Okay.
Anybody else like to ask something? Here in the second row, and then one down near the back, or the other way around.
It's just really more a comment and to say thank you. I hopped in the car at last minute, came over from Killarney today because
Wow.
the blurb just spoke to me, and I haven't read your book and I can't wait to read it now because you're a wonderful raconteur and your use of humour as well. So I'm really looking forward to the book, and I knew that, yeah, what I read just spoke to me because I'm 59, I'll be 60 in February, big admission, and like that, I hope to retire in the next year or two, and my son will be leaving home in the summer. He's doing his leaving cert, and he'd gone off to UCC for something today, and I must admit, driving over, there was that sense of liberation, of new time
Great.
opening up, and what I want to do for my 60s is something creative, like maybe like your book, or I did some creative writing in my 30s, but I just haven't got back to it. And it's like you said to the other ladies about starting putting the words on paper. I don't think I'll ever be a fiction writer, but like you say, with all of our life experiences and everything. So I found the whole thing very inspiring and really enjoyed your talk. And thank you so much.
That's just brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you. And you know, the great thing about being 60 is that, as well as the freedoms that we talked about and that you've kind of sampled, is you also have the clock ticking that says, if not now, when? Do you know, you're going to run out of road unless you start doing it, so do it.
Do it now.
Do it, yeah.
Somebody here in the second row, Sheila.
Hi, Barbara.
Hiya.
I actually didn't know what you looked like until today, and I think even I've been kind of thinking, you know, that was kind of nice that I didn't know what you looked like because I listen to you on the radio all the time. And so I think sometimes that means you really hear the person. You're not,
Yes.
you know, for me anyway. It's the invisibility piece for me that stands out because I overheard two colleagues about 3 or 4 years ago talking about it, and I have a habit of going, what are you talking about? So they taught me about how they had started to feel invisible after a certain age. And I have found myself for the last few years going, have I got invisible yet? Is it coming? When is it? Is it arriving? Is it? And then I started to realise that I've nearly been searching for the invisibility, and then I realised, has it happened yet? So I then realised it's very I'm looking for the invisibility extrinsically rather than, like, is it an intrinsic thing? And then could you, from your perspective, because I'm about to launch into my next decade, and could you give any advice for how to not overcome it, because that sounds like it's like some kind of a, I don't know, but sort of how to empower yourself to actually flip it on its head and it not be a negative and be positive.
Don't accept it. It's bullshit. It doesn't exist. I'm convinced that that whole thing about invisibility, again, is part of the patriarchy, shutting up women who get to a certain age and go, you know what, I don't care anymore who I'm upsetting. And you know what, I've got something to say. And you know what, I'm going to say it. It's much better to keep us distracted about how we look and thinking we're not invisible. Nobody's invisible unless you choose to be invisible. You are definitely not invisible. So, you know, don't buy into that. And, you know, when I looked up a bit about this a while ago, the well-known people who have said they're invisible are generally actresses or people in the public eye who feel they have to work. And this is awful that they should do that. I was talking to a woman during the summer, top of her game, runs one of the biggest multinational companies in Ireland, a very accomplished woman. And she's a few years younger than me. And I met her in Cork during the summer and she said, oh, your hair, because I let my hair go grey during lockdown. And she was like, oh, you know, I'd love to be able to do that. And I said, but you can. No, I couldn't. I said, well, you can. It's just laziness. Like, you don't, there's no secret. And she's like, no, I couldn't do that because I wouldn't be taken seriously in my job. And you know, she said, I have to work very hard to give the idea that I'm fit and I'm active and I'm this and I'm that. And again, you know, I lump a lot of it at the door of the patriarchy, but it is also the fact that we live in an ageist society that equates getting older with bad, and being younger is good and getting older is bad. But in actual fact, studies have shown that what I'm saying in the book is actually correct. Life is like a smile. It's what's it called? The U-curve of happiness. So your unhappiest years tend to be those middle years when you've got young kids, you've got a big mortgage, you've got your career, you've got a lot of financial burden. That's tough shit right there. When you turn about 50, I think, that starts to improve. So in actual fact, getting older is joyous and is creative and has limitless possibilities in a way that your younger years don't. But we're not told that. We're told that it is, and that is because we live in an ageist society that is also a patriarchy and that is also driven by consumerism. And keeping women on the back foot and thinking they keep needing to do something to make themselves relevant or valid or whatever makes us spend money. Spend your money on shit you want to spend your money on.
Yeah, here, here.